Oh, oh.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And you go there. All over the country. That one or all the traveling? Oh, really? that's the purpose where you go, or you?
No, Liz and I think this is more about Jewish leadership. So we started going to Jewish lessons like how many years about 20 years ago. And it's kind of fun. It's sort of
Yeah, no,
yeah.
Let's see,
But
Tim.
stuff like that.
last time was the first time.
He's like Ukrainian Catholic, I guess. But I guess he's just trained in that. And he found his way. I think he just runs all the houses of worship. Like he doesn't discriminate. I think he primarily is a physical church.
Well, yes and no. We were going up on Friday, and we were meeting my daughter and her husband, who's
He also
kids who live in
runs
Duxbury. So,
Brunswick Symphony.
all friends who came together. So we wound up just going to Duxbury. And we thought it was crazy because we knew what the story was supposed to be. We actually went down to Hyannis next morning, it's not that far, to see when we got a ferry. I thought I was saying crazy because it was a massive ferry. So we just stayed in Duxbury. But we had a
What, for
ferry.
four?
Yeah.
In the car.
Okay, you can
All right, good. They're on.
I guess I'm sharing for the
Well,
bus part.
And coming back, we had real trouble.
Oh, because of
getting off the
water?
island because
Oh,
of
okay.
another story. There's a walker.
All right, good.
to be in church or something.
But it's funny, usually,
I mean, it's like the majority of the thing that you're doing.
stuff is changing with dudes.
That's cool. So you just have so you would.
Should we announce at the beginning of this suggestion from our room that if somebody needs a break, they should choose to next break again. Let's see if that works. And experiment with people really supposed to be in that session.
I just sort of did the same thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. My grandfather was
I think it could be a fixed break. I mean, I like a fixed break as well. I don't think we should announce it, but maybe we should embellish it. Which if anybody has a real need for a short break, But yeah, I would suggest that, I think we should embellish it, because if somebody had a real need for a short break, we should just advise it.
yeah, well, so I don't know if you know the story.
Yeah, so I think we should do both. I think we should do both. Announce it when we have a regular break from now on,
That's
39,
just based on.
9.
So I went
If anybody has a real need for a short break, just shoot us a check.
He was in the jazz. That I can't remember the teacher, but I mean, I can only But
At Princeton High?
but the same.
At Princeton High?
I think I would have remembered something. I can't remember the name.
It's Mr. Horner when I was there.
Warner? Is that the jazz? Is that the jazz teacher?
I don't know. I'm just trying to think. So, I don't know that there was a jazz band per se. Then, it was a while ago.
When you were.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I'll tell you about
I hope this is working. Good evening. This is a regular meeting of the Princeton Planning Board. It's Thursday, October 17th, 2019, and the opening statement is as follows. Pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of the time and place of this meeting has been given by prominently posting the 2019 agenda resolutions of the regularly scheduled meetings of the Princeton Planning Board. Such notice has been placed on the official bulletin board at the Princeton Municipal Complex and is to be maintained throughout the year by transmitting a copy of such schedule to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, Times, Trentonian, and Comcast Media. A copy has been filed with the clerk of Princeton on the 7th day of December 2018. Legal notice on the adoption of said resolution appeared in the December 14, 2018 edition of the Princeton Packet. Could you call the roll, please?
Ms. Capizzoli? Here. Mr. Cohen?
Here.
Mr. Quinn?
Here.
Mr. Stakowitz?
Here.
Mr. Texarney?
Here.
Mr. McGowan?
Here.
Mrs. Gunning?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. There are a few announcements. Next week, a week from today, on October 24th, we're going to have a special meeting of the Planning Board. It will be to do the Princeton Charter School. We had also originally scheduled the application for Jared Mikulowski, but that application has been taken off by the attorney, and he's giving us an extension until the end of the year. So I do not have a new date for the hearing on that application. On November 7th, we will be hearing an amended site plan for Nelson Spring and also an HPC appeal for 2226 Birch Avenue. This is the Scott Copa property. On November 14th, we will be having a special meeting. It's scheduled to continue a review of the Landwind development. We found that the December 5th date as originally set, it was not acceptable to one litigant's attorney, and the November 14th date was requested and has a quorum. So, Mr. Muller, did you have any announcements?
Just two related items. A number of planning board members have asked to raise the possibility of could we take a break during the hearing. And the chair has decided at 9 o'clock we'll have a relatively short break, and that'll be a practice that we'll use from now on. In addition, if anybody has a real need for a break before then, if they could just advise the chair, and we'll make the appropriate arrangements for a short break, because if somebody actually leaves the dais during the course of a hearing, they cannot vote, even if they're gone for a minute. They technically cannot vote unless they've thereafter listened to the transcript, or read a transcript, or listened to a recording. And of course, if there's a vote that night, they wouldn't be able to do that.
Okay, thank you. Did you all get that? Okay. This evening's hearing, which is the trustees of Princeton University, is a major site plan for the residential colleges, and Julie Capizzoli will be chairing this. I will be recusing myself because my husband is a university employee. With that, let me turn the meeting over to Julie.
Thank you. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to this hearing tonight. First, I'd like to start with our planning director, Michael Place. He has written a very nice report on the application, and that is followed by Jack West's report, and then I think there's a few other reports, the Environmental Commission, we could go through that, and then we'll hear from the applicant.
Before we start, I'll ask Ms. Phillip whether proof of publication and service are in order.
Everything is in order, yes.
The board therefore has jurisdiction. Michael, if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that testimony about to give be the truth? So sworn or affirmed. And if you could mark as exhibit PB1 the matter that you have on the presentation board as PB1.
Thank you, Acting Chair, members of the board. I have some good news to start off. I will not be reading the entire report. As you can imagine, our applicant is certainly going to have a thorough presentation, but I want to highlight some aspects of this application. What you have before you is an application for preliminary and final site plan approval for a component of the current campus plan at Princeton University, and this is for 2 residential colleges. The location of the site is about a 10-acre site in the central portion of the Princeton's main campus. It's located to the south of Poe Field, which is a large green area at the center of the campus, and then it comes down to South Drive, which is one of the major east-west roads through campus. Currently, the site has recreational facilities, soccer fields, tennis courts, and other recreational facilities. Those will be relocated to other sites on the university property. This application is for 2 residential colleges that are more or less twin complexes. Each of them will house 500 students with some on residential staff. So the total occupation of the 2 colleges is 1,000. One is going to be 500 students, which is part of Princeton's overall enrollment target of increasing their overall enrollment by about 500 students. The other college space, the balance of it to get to 1,000, the other 500 spaces, is what you would call swing space. It's available to put students in residential spaces while other older residential facilities on campus will be renovated. So it accommodates both their expansion of enrollment and as the university is renovating other residential facilities. So I'm sure they'll go into more detail about that. As I said, the site's about 10 acres. It's connected to the rest of campus by a central open space and walkway system, and I'm sure you'll be hearing more details about that. There's interior open spaces and courtyards and connections to other open space and trail networks throughout the campus. North and south mostly is the circulation pattern for pedestrians. There's not a lot of on-site parking. There's just minimal parking, which you'll hear details about, mostly for support functions and deliveries. At the university, undergraduates do not have parking privileges unless there's special needs that they need to have a vehicle on campus. So it's also interesting, though, this location is within walking distance of the Dinky and other transit opportunities and hubs. So it seems to be served quite well by transit, as well as being linked to the pedestrian system. And staff has also asked to hear some details about how bicyclists will be accommodated, both storage and parking for bicycle users on campus. So you'll be hearing more information about that. The height of the buildings, it's about 7 levels, the highest parts of the building, to about 93 feet. Now that is certainly visually a change from the lower recreational facilities that are on site now. So we've asked the applicant to talk about what will be the visual impact. One interesting aspect of the arrangement of these 2 campuses is that this large open area, which is more or less sort of a horizontal oval, this will help define the southerly side, which is now just open fields and low density recreational facilities. This will sort of give an edge to the southern edge of where Poe Field is now. So staff would like to hear a little bit more about the thinking that went into that. And also, it would be nice to hear how where these relocated facilities are going elsewhere in Princeton. So I think those are some of the highlights. Oh, what's being proposed is consistent with the campus master plan, as I mentioned. There are no variances. It's in the E1 zone, so it's a permitted use. So it's a pretty straightforward application, and there's a lot of interesting aspects to it. I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about the architecture and design specifications of the project. Do you have any questions?
Questions for Michael? All right, maybe we'll go into Jack's report now.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
So sworn or affirmed.
So basically, the application was pretty clean. You'll see there was a bunch of comments from Joe Scoopy in our stormwater, but all of those are minor in nature. I've spoken with the applicant's engineer, and they're going to make all those corrections. There was a review by the fire marshal who had some concerns with fire access to the site. There's been several meetings with the university and the fire marshal. They've come to an agreement, and I think the university will have a presentation as to what those changes are. And I think that was about it. The only thing under stormwater, we asked that they consider using more porous materials for their hardscaping. They are using a lot of asphalt and concrete for the pedestrian walkways. So if they would consider some more porous materials. That's all I had.
All right, thank you. Also, we do have a report from the Environmental Commission, and I just wondered if we should wait and have that discussed after the applicant presents, just because it'll go into a fair amount of detail on the applications. Zenon, do you want to comment, or?
Yeah, no, I think that sounds good. I'd be curious to hear how the applicant addresses some of the concerns of the Environmental Commission. I think they already have, so it would be, I'm guessing that they'll address it in their presentation.
All right, thank you. Well, then I'm going to turn it over to the applicant, and I appreciate everyone being here for this, and we're looking forward to hearing about the project.
Thank you very much. For the record, my name is Christopher DeGrezia from the law firm of Drinker, Biddle, and Reith, here on behalf of the applicant trustees of Princeton University. As Michael described and went into detail, this application is for preliminary and final site plan related to 2 residential colleges proposed by the university. We're about to go through a very detailed slide presentation. What you'll see, though, is a lot of slides that look very familiar. Earlier this year, we came before the planning board with a concept plan. It was, I think, in February or so. And at that time, the university was pretty far along in terms of its design and what they were proposing. So instead of a typical concept plan, you got to see a lot of details. So when we look at some of the slides today, they're going to look very familiar because the elevations are going to be very similar. There's, of course, a natural progression when you engineer the plans, and they've evolved a slight amount based on comments and concerns that your staff and consultants have had, but there are no surprises. Basically, what you saw earlier in the year is the same thing that you're going to see tonight. One of the things we talked about in that early concept is that how great this location is for this particular project. First, it's sort of surrounded by university uses. In the southwest portion of the campus, it's sort of the hole in the donut. So on all sides, you have university uses. It's very, very far away from any type of public roads or from any type of neighborhoods. The second aspect that makes this site really perfect is that it's already fully developed. So there's no environmentally sensitive areas. There's no wetlands, there's no streams. You don't have to worry about any habitats being destroyed, because we're basically building this on top of disturbed area, mostly that have improvements. Softball, soccer, tennis. The other part about it that makes this ideal is that it really presents an opportunity to strengthen connections throughout the university. So this is an area where there's some paths, but it's a real opportunity to enhance those paths. As Michael pointed out, it's really close to the Dinky. So in terms of circulation from pedestrian standpoint, from bike circulation, and you'll see the detail that's gone into the plan. This project has a lot of many positive attributes. There's a lot of sustainability measures implemented. There's green infrastructure. You see a lot of passive design strategies, and we'll go through all the details in a little bit. Even the landscaping isn't an afterthought. It's part of the design. You'll see how that helped to create the whole feel of this particular campus. And as Michael pointed out, it fully conforms to the ordinance, so what you're going to see tonight in terms of location, in terms of size and scale, in terms of all the bulk standards, there's no variances. I don't think there's any design waivers. It's just fully compliant in all respects. And with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to our first witness. Jerry, would you like us to have, I'm anticipating at least 3 witnesses, and then we have some special.
Why don't we swear them all in? at
Have them
once?
all in?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have Ron McCoy, we have our engineer, Christian Roach, and we have our traffic consultant, George Jacomar.
If you could all raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth? So sworn or affirmed. If each of you could state your full name and spell your last name.
For the record, I'm Ron McCoy, MCCOY, and I'm the university architect.
R-O-C-H-E.
I'm sorry, if you could spell the last name again, I apologize.
R-O-C-H-E.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is George Jacomar from BFJ Planning, traffic consultant. Do you want me to spell it?
I think it's a Jacqueem.
Q-U-E-M-A-R-T.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, George. So Ron McCoy is a licensed architect. He's appeared here many times, and we'd like to present him not only as a representative of the university, but as a professional architect.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening. Christopher has done a good job, I think, of giving some overall framing of the project. Let me begin by just making sure that we all understand what a residential college is at Princeton University. Essentially, it is a community within the community. It is the center of teaching and learning. It's also where the academic advising goes on for the 500 or so students that live in the residential college. This 500-bed unit that the two colleges that we're proposing here are about the normal size of our residential colleges, and there's been a lot of analysis in terms of creating community that leads to the recommendation for this size of a college. Now, there will be 2 colleges here. The conversation about swing space is that the second college allows us to have swing space elsewhere in the inventory of housing on campus. And there are 3 possible outcomes for that housing that would be vacated to move into this, to comprise this college. First possible outcome is that those buildings could be renovated for, and with the renovations, some number of bed count would probably be lost, maybe 10 to 20% of bed count, because as we renovate some of those older buildings, we add more social space, more community space. We sometimes have to add fire stairs or corridors. We have to upgrade the life safety component. So inevitably there's some bed loss. The second outcome could be that those existing buildings were either repurposed for a non-residential use or they're demolished, in which case the beds would be removed from our inventory. The third condition could be that they could be used indefinitely as swing space, as Michael said. So these are the potential outcomes of those existing buildings, and having that swing space available to us is extremely valuable, because then that allows us to begin a program of renovating and retrofitting the older generation of residential buildings on campus. So this is part of a sort of large, comprehensive planning effort. We haven't identified the sort of renovation projects yet. That will happen in due course, but this gives us the capacity to do that. As also has been said, the existing site is one that has athletic facilities, varsity athletic facilities. Softball is on the site, and softball will be moving to the Lake campus in West Windsor. Currently, there has been a temporary softball facility built on the east side of the Princeton campus. The student athletes are already using that facility. Tennis, varsity outdoor tennis, is located on the site, and varsity outdoor tennis will also move to the Lake campus in a new facility that's intended to house indoor varsity tennis, indoor varsity squash, and outdoor varsity tennis. So those will also move to the Lake campus. The soccer facilities that are on the site, the soccer practice field will remain. It's not touched by this project, and it will remain for both a combination of varsity use but also campus recreational use. So it becomes another asset to the campus. And then the Roberts Stadium, the game field for varsity soccer, will relocate to the eastern side of campus, near where the other athletic facilities are on the eastern side of the campus. So those are the primary sort of conditions of the project. Now I'll walk you through some more issues. So we begin with context and planning principles for the project. Just to make sure that we all understand the site, you can see it indicated in the middle of this diagram here. As it has been said, it's on the south side of Poe Field, and you can see some of the athletic fields that are currently in that location. This site was the site that was identified in the 2026 Campus Framework Plan, and as presented to you earlier in our concept plan presentation.
Ron, let me interrupt you for a second. Let's mark this as Exhibit
yes.
A1, and do you have hard copy, Chris?
We've given a PDF version
Okay,
to carry.
that'd be fine, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll use one number for the entire presentation, and the pages are numbered.
So this is the plan from the 2026 campus plan. You can see here that the site was identified in that campus plan. And what the planning framework did was give us an idea of the capacity of the site. So we knew from the campus planning exercise that this site had the capacity to handle 2 residential colleges. So that was really the primary purpose of the campus planning effort, was to explore a wide range of possible sites for the expansion of the undergraduate student body population. We wanted to find a site that could accommodate 2 colleges because we knew that they would not be immediately contiguous or adjacent to existing colleges, and we wanted to create a critical mass that we could develop by expanding and creating 2 new colleges. Now, zooming in and looking at the site, you can see the red dashed boundary of the site. I'm going to show this slide, or versions of this slide, quite a lot as we walk through the presentation, and I'll give more details about the site development and the position and the architecture of the buildings. But this is just to orient you and make sure that we have an understanding of the site. So here
Ron,
again,
as you go through the slides, if you could state what number the slide is, so just for the record, it'd be
Great.
easier to access.
great. I will do my best. I'll probably forget, and you'll have to remind me. All right, this is slide 5. Slide 6 is an illustration of the some of the primary vehicular and pedestrian and bicycle pathways to the campus. One of the things that holds the campus together are planning principles. And whenever we do a new project on campus, we want to knit that building into the existing fabric of the campus. And so this project is particularly attentive to absorbing and incorporating and facilitating pathways to the project and around the project and through the project. You'll see here on the left side of the site is that's Elm Drive, the bold line, and then there's a parallel line which is a pedestrian pathway that goes through the existing woodlands. That pathway is more or less there now, and then we would feed off that pathways for entrances into some of the courtyard spaces. There's a primary northwest to southeast passageway through the entire complex. And this is important particularly as we look to the future because, as you know, we've identified the Lake Campus as one area for potential growth. The Lake Campus and the recreational assets that are around Lake Carnegie are already a very strong attraction for the campus community. So we wanted the site really to be porous so that it was open to both the north, which is what everybody would try to understand to be the front, but also open to the south, which anticipates future development. On the east side of the complex, there is another pedestrian pathway. The southern portion of it is used for service to the kitchen area, kitchen and servery, and I'll explain that in a moment. Zooming in even closer, you can see on the western side of the site what we call College 7, but actually now named Perlman College. We have a donor who's named that college. And on the eastern side of the site, College 8, which is as yet unnamed. And you can begin to see some of the landscape features that I just described, some of the pathways. But again, I'll talk about that in a bit. Before going there, let me just go through the program. I mentioned how the residential college is an essential component of the university. It's a living, learning community. And this just gives you a broad breakdown of the areas of space in the two different colleges. So this is the combined program. You can see here that the total program is about 485,000 square feet. And you'll see that the college and community spaces and dining hall spaces and the support spaces really are the things that make a college more than just a residential hall. The residential spaces are the halls within the college, but the community is created by those social spaces. And we've organized that so that they're all at the ground level and primarily at the northern end of the site facing on to Poe Field. This is slide 9. Slide 10. This is a diagram that illustrates what I just mentioned. You can see that the college and community spaces here in red are located primarily at the Poe Field site. And each one provides an entrance into the college community. So here in College 7 or Perlman College on the western side of the site, we have a portal which is traditional and typical of the organization of buildings on campus that leads to a courtyard that would be identified as a sort of central space for this particular college. The other college, College 8 on the eastern side of the site, has a similar portal, a slightly different character to the courtyard. This one begins to open up to the shared space at the center of the site. And as the site drops down the hill, there's a significant topographic change from the northern side to the southern side. The community spaces begin to transition into residential spaces. But you'll see that the pattern of courtyard making is really what organizes the overall site. So each college has 3 courtyards that more or less belong to that college, and then the 2 colleges together shape a larger quad in between the 2 colleges.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just a clarification on the community function versus the residential function. Is this showing that there's actually residential on the ground floor as the slope goes down, or would there be community function on the ground floor, but this was showing the upper floor because it's on the same level as the community functions that are on the northern part?
That's a great question. It's actually both. Because this is now elevated and it's one level above the ground level, it's residential. But at the ground level, it's also residential. So there's only so much community program that you can spread around, and we wanted to concentrate that at the place of arrival. One of the challenges in a lot of there's several challenges in the existing inventory of our residential colleges. One of them is that they're literally opaque. They're a mystery. If you're not part of the community, they're a mystery. And we wanted intentionally to make these colleges much more transparent, open, welcoming, inviting, less mysterious. So we located the community spaces at the ground level, and we really tried to make them transparent to the landscape and to the campus around. The second aspect of that is that most of with the exception of Whitman College, all of our colleges have been cobbled together over time. They had not been designed as cohesive social units for 500 students. And so good luck finding the advising office, the head of college office, the other social space, things like that. We wanted to create a front door and a place of arrival but also some diversity within that, and we'll talk about a little bit about that. So these are, and all of that is really trying to make a new generation of college hostels on campus that support the new generation of students, the diversity of the student body population, and create a welcoming and inviting sense of belonging for all the students on campus. So there's a lot of very, very careful communal and social aspirations behind some of these decisions. All right, slide 11. So now as you begin to go down the site, now we're looking at the ground level on the southern part of the site to answer your question. And you can see residential units at the ground level. But you can also see the lower level of the servery, which is on the eastern side of the site. And this is the loading dock, this is the access drive that would be used as a service drive, but it's still primarily a pedestrian pathway. That is a shared back of house kitchen, and then the servery is also shared, and then each college has a dining hall. So College 7 on the west has a dining hall that looks out to its garden, and College 8 has a dining hall that looks out to the east to its garden. The character of landscape is something I'll talk about in a minute, but this character of landscape augments and reinforces the woodland character of the western side of the site. We'll talk a little bit about the trees that do have to be removed to build these buildings, but we'll also talk about how we want to restore the woodland character on that western side of the site. On the eastern side of the site, there's a little bit of a different landscape treatment, which is more of a bosque, trees organized in a bosque in those particular courtyards. At this southern part of the site, we also have the head of college houses. So the head of college house is located at the southeast corner here for College 8, and at the southwest corner here for College 7. This one is a two-story head of college house. This is all on a single story, so it's a little bit larger horizontally. And we have head of college houses in all of our colleges, but they don't reside on site. So this is, again, another advancement. This provides a social space, a gathering space. The head of college will invite students to meals. Spaces are designed to accommodate larger groups. It provides a kind of porch light effect. Somebody's always there. And so it reinforces the sense of community that we're trying to create with the residential colleges. All right, slide 12. Here's where we get to the upper levels. And so this is a fourth level plan. And as was said earlier, the buildings are between 3 stories and 7 stories. But we'll talk about this in some future slides. But what I wanted to point out here is that there are 2 or 3 really important planning principles at work here. One of them is that the central space, the primary sort of pedestrian experience that binds the 2 colleges together, that's really surrounded by the buildings that are low-rise, 3 stories. The wings of the buildings that grow higher show their narrow ends to that central space, and then go out into the woodlands so that they're absorbed into the woods, or into the new landscapes on the eastern side. So that's a strategy to minimize the presence of these buildings. The other thing you'll see here is that, and we'll get to this also later, these are as carefully placed as possible to optimize passive solar orientation. We wanted to get as much as possible a straight north and south orientation to take advantage of passive solar gain and to minimize heat gain on the facades. And so this is another organizing strategy for that configuration. The other thing you'll see is that the buildings are quirky. They make little jogs, offsets, slightly different tweaks in the geometry. And that's a kind of pervasive formal strategy throughout the organization of the building. And that's very, very intentionally was heavily considered, because one of the basic features of the experience of the Princeton campus is its picturesque quality. And by tweaking the geometry of these buildings, we can break down the massing and make them more visually interesting. So that we are really attentive to that. You can imagine a very rational version of this would be pretty relentless. And so from the very beginning, one of the goals was to use these principles of the campus, the sort of offsets, the picturesque quality, the variety in massing, all to create a setting that, while while taller than other places on campus, and this is one of the questions we were asked to explain, is really fundamentally about making a place that's very much part of the campus. So that form making, the landscape strategies, the portal strategies, the care in massing the buildings are all part of trying to knit this project into the vocabulary of campus, even though it can be a couple stories taller. All right, now turning to site and landscape design. This is slide 13. Now we're on slide 14. I think well, let me just explain that Princeton University has had for over a century a tradition of working with a single consulting landscape architect for a whole generation of projects. We've just finished a wonderful period of about 13 years working with Michael van Valkenburg landscape architects for the generation of projects that have been completed over that time. And with the launch of this new capital plan and campus plan, we've selected a new landscape architect for this generation of projects, and that's James Corner Field Ops. James Corner Field Ops, Field Operations, they have many shorthand names. But they're the landscape architects of the High Line in New York City and other landscapes. I just realized that since I'm catching myself naming our landscape architect, I should name our architects, which is Deborah Burke Partners. Sorry, Noah. Noah is here representing Deborah Burke Partners. They are also in New York City. They are experts in hospitality, in residential, in academic and higher ed buildings. And Deborah Burke is the dean of the School of Architecture at Yale, and she's still got the job. So the firm is fantastic, and this is a very, very thoughtful piece of architecture. So now, one of the things we're going to talk about, and Christian will elaborate on this, are some of the stormwater management strategies. So what we're showing here are the number of green roofs. So on those pieces of the project that are lower, that the upper stories of the residential buildings will look down upon, those are green roofs. Some of them are occupiable green roofs, and some of them will not be occupiable green roofs. The ones that are occupiable will be occupied with a card access, so that the college can monitor and control the use of those rooftops. We learned when we were in the early planning stages of these projects, we traveled around the country and looked at about a dozen or more different campuses and their projects. And we found how valuable some of these rooftop spaces could be, particularly at the lower levels. When you get higher than 2 or 3 stories, safety and security has become a major risk. But at these levels, they can be wonderful social amenities for the program. But they also serve then as a piece of our stormwater management strategy. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So those are a bit of a diagram of the green roofs, and now we're on slide 15. Switching to slide 16, this is a diagram of the various pathways, the primary, secondary, and tertiary pathways on the campus for the 2 colleges. You'll see here that the color coding is pretty obvious. Those pathways that are direct connections all the way through the site are of a certain width. We've tried to be mindful with the design of these pathways to make them friendly for bicycles and pedestrians, and these days scooters, which are getting around campus. And then the secondary pathways are more private. They tend to wander through the woodlands here on the western side of the site, and they make connections to some of the corners of the site at the southern boundary of the site. And then the vehicular access, as I said, would happen on the southern part. This would be for service on the southern part of the Eastern Drive. There was a question about move-in in one of the reports. So we have a tradition on campus, a very elaborate move-in ceremony. I mean, there's a very careful orchestration of when parents arrive with their students, how they're managed to the campus, where they can park and offload, and then where they go and park after they've offloaded. So on move-in and move-out days, we would create really a circular route around the 2 colleges, so vehicles could navigate those routes. We'll also talk in a minute about the conversations we've had with the fire department about ensuring that we can have fire access to the site through those perimeter routes. You'll see also the multitude of entrances. There's entrances throughout to the two colleges into the individual residential halls of the project. Now on slide 17, this slide talks about accessibility. Again, one of our goals was to make all of the pathways on the site fully accessible and all of the entrances, therefore, on the site fully accessible. So when you see some of these picturesque pathways on the western side, a lot of those are navigating contours. It couldn't just be a straight line. They wander through the woods, but they work well with the character of the campus, and they also provide accessibility. So the site is really thoughtfully and fully accessible at all the entrances to the colleges and to the individual residential halls. And then bicycle parking. Bicycle parking is something that we monitor all of the time. I think we have over 5,000 spaces for bikes on campus. We know that destinations such as this, which are farther from the academic center of the campus, are going to have more bicycles. And so we up the number of bicycle parking spaces that we have on something like this. We also constantly monitor the bicycle parking, so if we need more, we add more. That's very common. There was a question about a consideration of covered bike parking. We're a very different kind of community. We're not commuters. These are not, students are there for 9 months. They might have a bike. Not all the students have bikes, obviously. The Zagster program is very popular. Bike ownership is going down because of the Zagster program. But there's really not a place that warrants covered bike parking. And so we're very comfortable with this kind of arrangement. Then the pavement, which was also a topic of discussion. We share the goal for trying to use porous pavement whenever possible. But what we really share is the bigger strategy is just stormwater management. And I think that we have had some experience with porous pavement on campus. It's not altogether successful in terms of maintenance. And so I think what we want to do is focus on the big picture, which is the overall stormwater management goals, meeting our campus goals and meeting municipal goals. How we get there is really, there's lots of different tools in our toolkit. We have green roofs, we have some porous pavement. You see the grasscrete shown in the upper right-hand slide. This is on slide 19. We have areas where we can have reinforced turf. And then we have non-porous surfaces, asphalt and exposed aggregate. So we really think that the focus should be on the overall achievement of the stormwater goals and not really the methods that you use to get there.
And also there's two big, large bio-detention basins for infiltration purposes.
Right. We'll have a slide. I have a slide, I think, that talks about that in a bit. You'll also notice some larger paved areas that are indicated in these areas here. A lot of that is around planning for events and reunions and the need to tent the campus. So we actually have to plan our sites so they can accommodate the kinds of tents for events that we have on campus. Access for emergency vehicles. This is the subject of conversation with the fire officials. But as I've pointed out, the access is going to be on the pathways on both the western side of the site and also the eastern side of the site for emergency vehicles. We have a small handful, I think 7 vehicles that will park on campus. Some of them are loading and service vehicles here, and then 2 vehicles each for each head of house, each head of college house that's on campus. This is a diagram that illustrates the rain gardens that Christopher just referred to. So whenever possible, we use a above grade rain garden strategy to expose the rain garden strategy to the campus and make a feature out of it. So we have in 2 of these courtyards on the western side, and really the bulk of the landscape on the southern side of the site, we're able to accommodate the rain gardens. As I mentioned, we have then different landscape strategies, the sort of woodland strategy on the west and the bosque courtyard strategy on the right. This is slide 21. Slide 22 talks about, gives a high-level overview of some of the landscape stormwater management strategies. Christian will give testimony after my presentation about the details of the stormwater management strategies, and of course he'll be available for questions after our presentations. But basically, this is the handful of strategies we're using. We're using visible stormwater management with green infrastructure. Those are the things that I just talked about. We integrate landscaping and stormwater management design. So some of those rain gardens also have facilities underground that help with stormwater management. Green roofs for mitigating roof runoff. I've talked about that. We have a significant reduction in site runoff above the regulatory requirements. Our campus standards are quite ambitious. We enhanced the water quality benefits, and we use infiltration and recharge on site with bioretention basins. So that's an overview, and Christian, as I said, will provide more detail. Slide 23 is an illustration of the range of native plants that we'll have on site. The campus has a tradition ever since Beatrix Farrand of trying to make the landscape palette as colorful and as seasonal as possible. We want to, witch hazels are popular on campus because they provide early color, but we also try to provide color throughout the year. And we do, other than using irrigation for the startup of our landscapes, we don't irrigate our campus. So we select species that can survive on campus without irrigation beyond the startup period of irrigation. And then in terms of some of the additional, now on slide 24, more illustrations of the vocabulary of plant materials. You'll see an emphasis here on this slide of some of the woodland ground covers, because we really are trying to strengthen the woodland condition on the western side of the site, but also in some of the bosque areas and the eastern side of the site we'll have some of this woodland mix, which is going to be a feature of the landscape. Slide 25 is more of that vocabulary of both grasses, and we want to minimize the sort of lawns that require a lot of water and a lot of maintenance. So a very sustainable landscape is part of our strategy. Slide 26 is another illustration of our plant palette, and slide 27 I'm on now is the grading and stormwater plan that actually shows you the manipulation of the topography to create the stormwater basins and the rain gardens that I talked about on the earlier slide. You'll also see on the right-hand side of this slide, it illustrates that there's an 18-foot drop across the site from the high side to the low side. So that's one of the challenges to create the site fully accessible, and it also explains how the site drops down the site. Important, it has a kind of very interesting interior courtyard here, which is a light well to the plaza level above and a courtyard to those dining halls below. This is a section through the site taken from Poe Field on the north, so you're looking east, looking across the site to the rain garden at the southern side. And here is that lower level of the servery and the dining halls that look out into that garden that I just talked about. And then you also see here, as the section is taken through the center of the site, you'll see the lower height of buildings toward the center, as I talked about. And the taller buildings, it's really the ends of the buildings that you're seeing here, and you're also seeing them in silhouette as they recede in the distance, and the variety of massing that they have. So this little diagram up in the upper right shows where that section is taken. This is slide 28. Slide 29, a bit overwhelming and comprehensive, showing multiple sections, but section cutting west to east at the upper part of the site, then through the middle part of the site, and the lower part of the site. And here's where, again, you see at the middle part that sunken garden, dining halls on either side, private or semi-private gardens to the west and to the east. And then the section above and the section below, again, show that strategy of the lower massing, the more traditional campus massing toward the central space, and the larger heights going east and west. And you really wouldn't, have these perspectives if you're in the public spaces. So we're trying to mitigate that height as much as possible. And then a summary slide here on slide 30 that talks about our sustainability ethos. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I think that I will point out that programming the space for health and well-being is one of the sort of central goals of the project. The landscape that connects to the woodland, I've talked about that. Stormwater, we've talked about. Green roofs, we've talked about. Daylight, these buildings are, as I said, optimally located for passive solar orientation. We have operable windows that give students control of fresh air. Responsible waste management. If you look at our sustainability action plan, you'll see a lot of thoughtfulness about our objectives and aspirations to manage our waste. Outreach and education programs are part of that waste management program, but also part of our larger sustainability strategy. Reusing wastewater from the chiller plant for toilet flushing. That's a strategy that, there was a question in one of the reports asking us about considering rainwater for toilet flushing. It turns out that by using the chiller plant, we don't need to harvest rainwater to toilet flush because we're going to use the wastewater out of our chiller plant to achieve the same goal. So we share the goal, we're just getting there through a different bit of technology. The next to last bullet talks about a strategy that I would say at this point is, well, there are two strategies that are identified here. It's going to be an either or that we're pursuing. We're either going to use existing steam condensate that's coming from the northern part of the campus back to the central plant and use that to heat to provide as a heating source for the buildings, or if our new geothermal plant is up and running by the time the buildings come online, we'll use geothermal. Either way, they are both dramatic reductions in carbon footprint and very essential technologies that will get us to our goal of being carbon neutral by 2046. And then we are designing the buildings for LEED Gold certification. These will be available in the submission. We're on slide 31, which talks about the campus. What I just want to focus on here is that a lot of this responds to the campus plan strategies. During the campus plan, we identified these 30-year goals by 2046 to be carbon neutral. On the left are the impact indicators. We wanted to ask ourselves, how can we measure our progress toward our sustainability goals? So we work with campus goals, with photovoltaics, for example. There were more comments about photovoltaics. We look for opportunities to get the most cost-effective photovoltaics first, and those opportunities are not on the rooftops of these buildings. We're building new photovoltaic fields in Princeton, in West Windsor, and Plainsboro that will dramatically increase the amount of photovoltaic electricity that we provide to the campus. So we have campus-wide strategies that are really the most, have the greatest impact on how we're going to reach our goals. But nevertheless, we then have to say, okay, how does each individual building contribute? What's the responsibility of each individual building to contribute to those 30-year goals? And so the things that I just talked about on the prior slide are the responsibilities of this project to carry its weight to get us to help achieve those 30-year goals. And so you'll see some of those assignments for this project. So water use intensity, building mass and envelope, passive solar design with northwest exposures, optimal solar control, high performance envelope, and the R value. So that shows how our campus indicators translate into particular goals for this particular project. So that's the methodology that we use to design the project. Let me talk a little bit about more about passive design strategies. This little diagram shows how the project is oriented toward the south, and I believe that about 85% of the facades of the buildings are within 19 degrees of pure south. When you're able to do that, your need for solar shading reduces, so you don't need to shade the windows as much. We have, however, this was another SPRAB comment, We do have different techniques in each building to provide a kind of recess to the windows, so they get some additional shading from either a slight overhang over the windows or a deeply recessed window. So that's an additional strategy that we're using. The rest of these things, I think, talk about some of the things we've talked about on the prior slide. This is slide 32. Slide 33 is a transition slide, but we're going to talk now in slide 34 about exterior materials and character of the buildings. So the buildings are contemporary. This is part of our very conscious effort to make them more open, inviting, welcoming, things that are not collegiate Gothic. And you see here, the lower left, you see a plan diagram that illustrates where this perspective is taken from. So we're looking at the portal into College 7. And just to the left of that portal on this rendering, you'll see a common room. So this will be the primary social room of College 7. College 8 also has a common room. It's in a different location. But these are the primary social hubs around the colleges. You'll look through the portal in a real typical Princeton tradition, through the portal to a garden courtyard, through another portal to another garden courtyard. That's taking you toward the sort of center of the complex, down right and through here. You'll see some of the landscape, the more sustainable strategy around landscape. You'll see even careful attention to the tradition of vines that grow on the walls of our buildings. All these things are part of the landscape strategy that James Corner Field Ops and Deborah Burke Architects have been working on. At these portal moments is where we will use touches of wood to enhance the warmth and character of the building. That's a kind of, again, we have primarily a stone campus, but there are moments of wood. And then the buildings themselves are masonry, they're brick. We're currently in the process of going through mock-ups that will specify the actual brick, but we're looking at a variety of warm earth-colored bricks that will be used for the building with special bonding patterns. So there's variety to the bond patterns that all bring together the sense of craftsmanship that are part of the features of buildings on the Princeton campus. This is the portal into College 8, so very much a similar kind of vocabulary. A portal into a courtyard, under an overhang into another courtyard, so that sense of vista, the unfolding of space, which is very, very typical of the Princeton campus. Again, you're looking into spaces that are 3 stories and 4 stories tall, sustainable landscape in the front. And on the left of this one, instead of a common room, there's one of the primary amenity spaces of the college, which is a performance space. So that performance space can be used, it's basically a glass box, not a black box, but it has curtains that could be drawn to provide a black box atmosphere. And that could be a sort of beacon. All of these spaces that are on Poe Field are beacons to the rest of the campus onto Poe Field and really announce the kind of activity of the campus. This then is a illustration, a photograph of the sort of directional palette of materials, I'd say. So we haven't made final choices, but this shows you the earth-colored brick. We're playing with different textures of that brick, and we'll be specifying the brick soon. These are the timber or the wood soffits. We are using wood frame timber storefront around the common spaces at the ground level to get some warmth and activity into those spaces. And altogether, a sort of really warm and rich variety of materials for the project. Then moving into the center of the project, again, you can see here this illustrates a lot of what I've been talking about, the picturesque quality, the variety, the stepped massing. You can see the depth of the windows. This is, I'd say, even though some of these buildings do get up to 6 and 7 stories in the sort of distance, very attentively trying to be a good partner with the rest of the community. In this particular view, we're now toward the center of the 2 colleges and looking down into that sunken courtyard, which provides light and landscape to the 2 dining halls which are below. Now we're at the southern part of the site, and we've turned around looking back to the north. And you'll see again the variety of massing, 3 to 4 stories in this central part of the site. And the larger massing, which steps away from the center, really is not the space-defining character of the complex. And then here, twilight view from Poe Field. This is probably the one view where the masses of the building are most evident, because that you're now outside the sort of two-college complex, and you're looking at the sort of long faces of those facades. But these still have been carefully manipulated for those picturesque qualities, a sort of silhouette, which has a lot of variety. Some changes of material, in this case some metal siding that sort of just provides relief from the masonry siding. You'll see a lot of variety in the profile of the buildings. It steps up and down from 4 to 5 stories. And then you'll see the prominence of the portals and the amount of glass. Throughout the social space, it's almost entirely glass at those ground levels. This is slide 39. So slide 40, we've been sensitive to the issues of height and context as the comments that we've received have also shared. But we believe that all the things that I've talked about, the very careful attention to creating a place that's of the tradition of the Princeton campus, will be, we're very confident that it will be successful. We wouldn't be doing these buildings if they are right next to a traditional 2 or 3 story collegiate Gothic building on the center of campus. As was mentioned in Michael's comments at the building, we have the advantage of Poe Field. We have a big open space that sets up the opportunity to create a slightly higher density of buildings. Now here, we're looking from the western edge of Poe Field across to the eastern edge, and the context here is really the academic buildings of neuroscience and psychology, which are of a similar height. So these are contextual to the locals, to those buildings. They are a place apart from the rest of the campus, and so they can define their own context. And then the vocabulary and care of architecture is absolutely ingrained and taking lessons from the history of the campus. Then if you turn around, if you're coming off Stryker Bridge at the eastern end of the site and looking to the western part of the site, here all the way through to the tower at the graduate college, which is 173 feet. But again, you'll see that the buildings on the northern part of Poe Field are slightly lower by a floor or 2, but the openness of this space is generous enough that all of these buildings can be really, really good neighbors to each other. This is slide 41. Slide 42 is just a summary recap of the presentation. I think now we're going to go to Christian.
Yes. Engineer, I think you've been sworn in already, but I guess if you could just really briefly go through your qualifications.
I'm going to go back to slide 21 here.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, I'm 0 for 2 with the mics tonight. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Christian Roach. I'm a professionally licensed engineer in the state of New Jersey, as well as several other states. I've been practicing land development engineering over about 14 years. I have bachelor's degrees in civil engineering and business from Lehigh University, as well as a master's degree in civil engineering from North Carolina State.
Thank you. We accept your qualifications. Thank you.
Thank you. So if it's okay with the board, I was planning on giving a brief overview on the proposed stormwater management measures on site. As I'm going through my overview, I will try and touch on some of the comments we received from the board professionals, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. As we began to develop the overall stormwater management approach for the project, we put a lot of thought into it with the design team, the landscape team, and the university. And sure.
Like karaoke.
So as we were developing the early design principles, we came up with 2 main overarching goals. And the first goal was we really wanted to integrate the stormwater management design with the site design and the landscaping. And there were 2 main reasons for this. The first reason was the stormwater management features have the ability to act as amenities when they're mixed in with the hardscape. Or another way to say this is we're trying to avoid, the 1980 subdivision where you have all your development in one portion of the site, and then you have a stormwater management basin sitting by itself acting as an eyesore in another portion of the site. More importantly, what was guiding this goal is we really want to limit the amount of tree clearing we had to do on the site. So by intertwining the stormwater management basins with the landscaping in the courtyard areas, we were really able to cut down on the amount of trees we had to clear, and specifically, we were able to preserve the woodland area adjacent to Elm Drive in the western portion of the site. The second main goal we had in the early design stages was we had a really large emphasis to use green infrastructure wherever we could. In addition to the green roofs that Ron already mentioned, we're proposing 2 rain gardens in the northwestern portion of the site, as well as 2 bioretention basins in the southern portion of the site. These bioretention basins not only provide water quantity or retention of stormwater, but they provide water quality treatment, as well as enhancing the groundwater recharge on the project site. So the green infrastructure, not only were we meeting the municipal requirements for stormwater, we're exceeding them in a number of areas. So specifically, Ron also mentioned this, the university has a site-specific stormwater management master plan that outlines their own goals. And one of those goals is that for the 90th percentile storm event on an annual basis, that all of that water is reused or infiltrated on site. And we were able to meet that goal with the construction or future construction of the 2 bioretention basins. So another way to look at this is every storm event that is less than 1.25 inches, that's typically 90% of the storm events we'll see on an annual basis, we won't have any runoff leaving our basins. All of it will be infiltrated on the site. For the larger storm events, the 2-year, the 10-year, the 100-year storm events, we're significantly reducing the runoff that leaves the site compared to pre-existing conditions. For the 2-year storm event, we're reducing it by more than 50%. For the 10-year storm event, it's on the order of 25%, and then the 100-year, it's on the order of 20%. So we did receive some comments from the board professionals. I think there were 10 to 12 comments. I've reviewed these with Mr. West. They're minor and more technical in nature. We have no problem addressing these comments with Jack as we move forward through the design.
Okay, thank you. Do you have more, or do you mind if I open this up to the board
You
for
can
questions?
jump right in. Yeah.
Okay. So I was wondering if the board had any questions either about the architecture or the stormwater management.
I wanted to ask Mr. McCoy to re-explain to me the rationale around not providing covered bike parking, because it seems to me if you've got 500 bikes parked in this location and they're for students who live here, are they just supposed to leave their bikes out there December, January, February in the uncovered spaces? Or I didn't understand the rationale why you don't need covered parking for a residence like this.
I think that we have a robust cycling community without bike covered parking. So it's never been an issue that the students have asked for the covered parking.
Do they bring their bikes into their dorm rooms?
They leave them outside. I'm a commuter. I bike to campus. I do have my bike in my office when I'm in my office, and I have it on campus when I'm on campus. And I have a wonderful little seat cover that I put on the seat when it rains, and that's my covered bike.
Doesn't do much for the chain, but.
Any other questions about stormwater management? These techniques are all what we've been told are the state of the art. So I think you're doing a pretty good job there. Did you want to continue with stormwater management, or do you want to move on to traffic? Or
I'd like to bring up George.
I guess I can ask a few questions. So I guess on the topic of stormwater management, just last May, it rained about 2 inches within, or 3 inches within 2 hours. It was one of these cloud bursts, extreme storm events. typically the typical models, the 2-year, 100-year, or 50-year, 100-year, don't account for that. I'm just curious if you've thought about that, if you are looking at, how to kind of handle that type of capacity.
We have, and one of the comments we received from the municipal engineer was a request to consider upsizing our stormwater conveyance system. Generally, those systems are sized to handle 25-year storm events, the actual pipe sizes and the catch basins that deliver the water to the bioretention systems. And we are moving forward with that request to upsize the pipes to the 100-year storm event. So typically when you have a high rainfall intensity over a short period of time that you mentioned, where you really get jammed up, it's not necessarily the basins that have the ability to handle that volume, it's the pipe sizes getting that water to the basin. So it was a good suggestion and something we're moving forward with.
Great. I guess I would also second David's comment about the bike parking. I feel like if it's a residential campus, having that covered bike parking does protect the bikes. I think that leaving the bikes out to the elements deteriorates them and limits the lifespan of those bikes. So I think that that's something that maybe should be reconsidered. I do, but I guess if you don't feel like that's needed in terms of architecturally, I understand.
Well, let me just to elaborate a little bit. The community is really one of a kind of transit use. The students take a bike that they know is going to get beat up. They'll if you look at a lot of our buildings, they'll also just leave the bike. They'll just walk into the building and drop the bike. So it's a different mentality. It's a kind of local and expedient thing. They're not big investments. They're just simple bikes to get around campus. And the campus has existed with bike for decades and hasn't had a kind of pressing need for covered bike parking. Now, if you cornered a bunch of students and asked them, would you like to have covered bike parking? They're going to say they would like to have covered bike parking. But of course, anyone would like that particular benefit. It just doesn't seem to be something that is a pressing need on the campus. I was telling my colleagues today, if you just Google bike parking in Amsterdam or Copenhagen, they're not going to be covered bikes. They're open to the air. 90% of them are open to the air. It's not a demonstrable incentive to bring a bike to campus. Students have a bike on campus to get from place to place. They don't need to have the covered bike parking.
All right. Well, I guess that's fine. I also think if you Google Amsterdam bike parking, you'll see a lot of indoor bike parking as well. But I think that they have a lot of bike parking in general. In any case, I just wanted to also ask a question about, I guess, the energy and heating. So I guess you mentioned that it might be steam heated or potentially geothermal heated. And I was just wondering which way it's leaning, and also, if it's steam, how that steam is heated.
It will be geothermal long term. It's just that what we're talking about is that we had a strategy to capture steam condensate. So the energy that's in the condensate that's coming back to the central plant could be a source of energy for heating. But we're currently working on the first of our geo-exchange heat pump facilities, and the geothermal wells are being tested. We're beginning to explore, and beginning to move forward with that. And the plan is always that this building would be put onto that geothermal system, so that the heat source would be the earth.
Great. All right.
I just have a question about timelines and schedules. If you were to get approval, what's your plan as far as construction goes?
If we're so lucky and fortunate to get approval, we would begin serious construction in the beginning of the new year, and with the anticipation of being open for the fall semester of 2022. And Christopher is going to talk about some of that.
Yeah, and just based on the schedule, as with many of the university projects, and I had raised this issue with your consultants, we would also like to move forward on some minor items under an early start program, which we typically do. And that includes the ability to kind of put up some fencing, to put utility hookups for the trailers, some silt basins, retaining wall at the soccer field, some of the demolitions. So as part of our application, we're also requesting an early start for those items that would occur throughout November and December.
And would the staging occur on the site and you would just shift things around, or?
I'm going to have to turn to my colleagues.
Are you talking about the construction?
You mean the construction
Yeah.
staging?
So ultimately what happens, we get the construction people involved, but what we do is we put together a plan and sit down with Jack and the police department to have sort of a construction plan and sequence, and something that the police department and Jack West is very comfortable with. So in terms of that staging, where it's located, what hours are people coming in, that's all going to be
Administrative. So.
yeah, it's
Okay.
going to be written down somewhere along the line, but it's usually done at the point where we're ready to mobilize.
Right. Okay, are there other questions?
Chris, I'm sorry, could you go back over what you want early approval for?
Oh, I was just kind of listing what we would typically do. So in an early start request, we have items like the trailers and site fence, the utility hookups, sanitary and electric for the trailers, the site fence around the site, silt basin, retaining wall in this particular project by the soccer field, and then the demo of the stadium softball field, the tennis center, and then after that, the balance, I'm giving this in the sequence of things that would happen. Then the demolition of the balance of the site, and then start excavation and rock removal. So those are the typical things. No vertical development, but that's sort of like a site prep that we typically ask to be able to move forward on our own risk.
All right, thank you.
It's a question that's probably related to the traffic report, but what's the overall level of staffing going to be for both colleges? We know how many. We know that there's 500.
Yeah. So let me walk through all that. It's a sort of careful calculation. So there will be 65 employees in the two colleges combined. Half of those would be new, so that's 33 persons. 2/3 are on site at peak time, so that's 22 new employees at peak. 74% of those do not participate in our transportation demand management. Therefore, 17 of them are going to be driving. So that's the staff side. Of the 500 additional students, we anticipate 1% will be granted permits, so that's 5 additional cars. And that adds up to 22 new spaces for the university that would be absorbed in our parking inventory. And then, as I mentioned in my testimony, there are 7 spaces on site, 2 for each head of college and 3 more in the service area.
All right, thank you. I guess we'll also hear that during the traffic study. Did you want to go ahead with the traffic study
Yes.
now? Or?
Let's do it. This is George Jacomar. He's been sworn in. He can go through his qualifications, but he's been here many times.
It's okay. Hi.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. I think Ron made the main part of my presentation. So we're talking of an additional parking demand of about 22 vehicles. And again, that's because, remember, the undergraduate students are not allowed to bring a car on campus, except for some very, very rare exceptions, and that's what that 5 number was. And I think it's good to put it also in the context, in the overall context. On the West Campus, west of Washington today, there are 4,300 parking spaces, roughly. And as you know, the university monitors that parking on a regular basis and tries to maintain a kind of 10% reserve parking, which is 430 spaces. So this 22 number is really peanuts in that context. I want to address a few of the points that were mentioned by your traffic engineer and Jack West. You know, the removal of the athletic facilities, does that have an impact on the parking? No, because any activities on those fields that generated traffic or parking, they typically occurred on weekends or evenings and did not affect the parking system. The university will not reduce its parking supply as a result. And obviously the employees and visitors that are generated by these new colleges, they will park in the overall system the way that employees and visitors park today. There are areas for visitor parking, as you may know. There was a question related to the driveway that's on the east side of the colleges, whether that could be redesigned to accommodate semi-trailers that would not need to back up. And that change has been done. So the small semi-trailers, what we call WB40, wheelbase 40 feet, can now drive up forward and then back, do a hammerhead turn to back into the docks. The large semi-trailers that are very rare in this case, I think the university estimates about once a month, could be larger than the WB40. They would stop on South Drive and then they would have to bring the goods on wheeled vehicles, smaller vehicles to the loading docks. We do not feel that there's a need to have a lay-by for that because it happens only once a month. That does not justify, to providing an extra lane for that vehicle if it only happens once a month. South Drive is a very relatively quiet street. There's not much traffic on it, so that can function very easily. There were questions whether the pedestrian crossing would be ADA compatible, the crossing that's on South Drive, and the answer is yes, it will be ADA compatible, and the university will replace that pedestrian crossing sign that your engineer identified in terms of, there's a sign there now, but it's an older fashioned sign, so the university will replace that with a more updated sign. I think those are all the points. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, yeah, David.
Just going back to the larger semi-trucks, do you have any sense of what time of day those typically would be coming?
I don't know. Most trucks on campus come early in the morning or morning time periods till early afternoon. But in this case, I don't know if the university has any information. I don't know that.
I mean, I certainly have used South Drive a fair amount. There are certain times of day when, there are 10 vehicles a minute, or it's not like Washington Road, but it's a fair amount of traffic.
You're right. It's not even Elm Drive. Elm Drive has a certain amount of traffic, but South Drive has very little traffic. Most people even don't know that it connects to Washington Road.
Well, South turns into faculty, correct? Or am I wrong? Okay.
It connects to Elm Drive, where the roundabout is, the second roundabout, and then it goes down to faculty. And it connects to Washington Road.
South is parallel to faculty.
Yeah, so South Drive is this road here at the southern edge of the site. Faculty Road is down here. There's no direct connection from one to the other. The roundabout here would bring you down Elm Drive and connect to Faculty Road. Okay. We also have the ability, and we often do this, is to manage our deliveries so that we have staff on site to make sure pedestrians are safe if there's a delivery. So that's
I was just mistaken as to what road we were talking about. I'm not concerned about South Drive if it's internal to the campus. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Are there any other witnesses you'd like to call on, or I I guess, I mean, there's a lot of people from the public here. If there aren't any more questions here, I could open it up to the public if someone would like to comment. Anyone interested in commenting on the project? I guess everybody's with the university. Yes, Michael.
I just wanted to wrap up the commentary on bicycle parking because I'm really glad the members brought it up, particularly about sheltered bicycle parking. We are trying to upgrade our whole approach to accommodating bicycle usage and storage. And I think some of the comments you heard tonight were based on some of the eyewitness accounts we've seen in town of multifamily or, apartment buildings and places like that where there's indoor storage of bicycles, and it's been tremendously popular. Some of us toured a facility nearby where it was just filled to the brim with bikes, and they probably could have had a second room. So that seems to be the direction things are going in. So I just wanted to give that context, why we think it's important.
Yeah, and I wanted to follow up and say, when I was in college, one of my roommates who had a nice bike actually would bring it up into the room, and he screwed a hook into the wall of the room so he could hang his bike, which was fine. I had a crappy bike, but I still brought mine inside, and I stored it in the bottom of the stairwell of the dorm that I was in. So, I think there's really, and this is many decades ago, I think there are more bicyclists now than there were back then. So I would just really encourage the architects to take a look. It doesn't need to be large blocks of covered bike parking. It could be distributed somehow throughout, even if it's just a little niche, in the dorm room where somebody who does care about their bicycle, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who don't care about them, but, can get it out of the weather during the winter months, because that's really what I'm concerned about. It's not the day-to-day usage. It's the, someone brings a bike to school for the year. They're not going to get picked up by their parents again until May. And, they don't want to be making a bicycle into a planned obsolescent commodity. They want it to be a lasting commodity.
Yeah, and I would also like to mention, I went to school in Denmark, and we had bike parking, covered bike parking. So,
I think we're also sensitive to not increasing the impervious surfaces on the site. So all the covered shelters add impervious coverage to the site. And I just think that maybe we can embark on I just don't think there's a demand there. I just don't think if we did a careful study with social scientists, it makes no difference. These are not commodities that students are investing in. These are bikes that will just get them through college, and then they're off.
I do see a lot of new types of things, like different kinds of scooters and hoverboard type things and everything. So do those kids then they bring them to the rooms?
Yeah, something smaller like that. Where there's definitely an increase in scooter traffic. I mean, there's every mode of traffic on campus. You'll find electric skateboards. Mm-hmm. The scooters have become more popular. Scooters and the skateboards obviously have the advantage of being brought into the rooms. Zagster has been a very popular program and growing, and reducing the number of vehicles, in private bicycles. So there's all modes of transportation.
Yeah, I've seen one you can fold it into a suitcase and then carry it around. Yeah. It's cool. Let's see about the portals and entries. I just wanted to compliment the architects on continuing that sort of Princeton tradition of vistas that follow from building to building, and the materials seem to be kind of carried over from other areas in that vicinity. So, I mean, I see the kind of synergy between these buildings and those other existing buildings.
Right.
So
We appreciate that, yes.
Other comments about questions? There's one person in the public. Sure, come forward. That's fine. Could you state your name?
Sure. Jacob Berman
And if you could raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes.
So sworn or affirmed.
Hi, I'm a senior at the university actually, and I just wanted to give a little bit of my input on the bike situation. I'm a bike rider myself, and I've actually I think I've had like 2 bikes now at the university, and I think I think there's been a lot of truth said on a couple different sides here. One part of the circumstance is that students don't buy the most expensive bikes. That is true. Both of my bikes actually have been stolen, which is a pain in the butt. And I think the university's actually done some stuff recently, or maybe the community has to crack down on that, because I know that was a bit of an issue. Certainly was for me. But what you guys are saying is definitely true in that students would like somewhere to put the bike during breaks. I mean, for summer holiday, if you have a bike on campus, and most students don't bring it home, there's actually a service. There's like a storage service that you can pay a certain amount of money to leave your bike somewhere in the summer in May, and then they bring it back to you in September. And then, so look, if the university wanted to provide a service to students that would keep it on campus without having to pay that price, that might be nice. And then in December holiday, I was definitely concerned. I forget, maybe my bike was stolen during one of that period of time, because I don't know, if you're someone that wants to come to campus December 31st, you know the students haven't been there in 2 weeks, the students aren't going to be there for another 2 weeks. I assume you could see bikes all over there. Maybe that's a common period of time that bikes used to get stolen or still get stolen. I think one year I brought mine into the dorm, into my room, which is not that easy to do because it's not that big of a dorm, but I don't know if that's even allowed, but it is a very nice thing to do. But yeah, I think it's just something to think about. I don't know if there is any place that on campus that it currently exists to put a bike, but if the university did want to think about doing that and making that known to all the constituents on campus and all the students, that there was one place that could, just for students, fit 100 bikes or a couple hundred bikes, that would be nice, but, I think it has to be weighed with some of the other costs.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Right. Well, is there any further discussion, questions? And if not, a motion?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, even though we kind of nitpicked a few things, I mean, this is really a remarkable design. I think that I commend the university for all its efforts in terms of sustainability and, detail in terms of, everything seemed to be really thought through. So I think that it's a great project and can't wait to see it built. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just echo what Zenon said. Very thorough application. The presentation of the concept plan was very helpful. Also, we could get our questions out then. And I'm agnostic on the bike parking question. I bring all my bikes inside, but I have a house, and I don't know. I know that students buy a bike freshman year from talking to a friend who owns a bike shop in town. They buy a bike in freshman year in the $300 to $350 range, and the expectation is that they'll leave 4 years later being able to buy a better bike, and that bike might remain. There used to be a field on the university campus that had thousands of bikes over there on Tiger Lane or whatever it's called. So anyway, I'm agnostic on that question.
Any other comments? Greg?
I just wanted to join my colleagues in also saying, thanking you for the presentation, and I really appreciated the focus on community as part of the design concept. I thought that was really good.
Can I just offer some fresh insight on bikes? Students are allowed to take them in the rooms, and we even provide the hooks.
Oh.
And then further evidence to the lack of attachment. Kim Jackson, our expert in transportation and parking services, tells me 200 or 300 bikes a year are just abandoned on campus.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm
most
aware
of
of
those-
that, but you've got a diverse student body. You've got absolutely 1,000 students who can afford to just abandon a bicycle, but you do have some middle class and even working class kids who are going to value a bicycle more than that. And so I think I'm glad to hear that they can take them into their rooms.
Right.
I just wanted to add that this conversation, which in the context has been sustainability, I think we're kind of veering into this sort of throwaway idea that these bikes have a limited lifespan and then they get tossed aside. That's not the thinking we want to have.
No, we donate them to the community, and then they become available to the community. So it's a very sustainable program that we have.
All right.
I'll make a motion
Thank you.
I will second.
to approve the application, I guess conditioned on addressing all of the staff comments that we've already been told are being addressed.
Jerry, do you want to review?
Yeah, what I like to do is just kind of go through them, not in tremendous detail. But first, with respect to the memo by Jack and Derek, starting on page 3, item B1, Roman numeral 4, and Christopher, jump in if the university has a problem with any of them. But if you don't, I'll assume they're okay.
I'm sorry, Jerry, what page are you on?
I'm on page 3.
Page 3.
Item B1, little 4.
Okay.
Then 2 at the bottom of the page. And then on the next page, well, if you go through paragraphs 1 through 11, that is on pages 4 through 6, there's basically a condition on in every paragraph. Do you want to spend a moment going through those to see if you have any issues?
So you're talking about the conditions. What paragraph is that?
Well, this is on page 4, starting with paragraph 1, and it continues basically on.
Oh, the stormwater conditions?
Well, no, I'm still on the Jack West, Derek Bridger memo. On page 4, under paragraph, it's stormwater drainage. There's a whole series of.
Gotcha. Yeah, we have no issues with any of those
Okay,
comments.
so all of those.
I think really if you want to just kind of jump to it, the engineering and zoning report put together by Jack and Derek, the two issues that we had with sort of the question, one would be where they talked about porous, and we presented our plan, how we look at it as, focusing on infiltration on the large biodetention basins, on the infiltration in the rain gardens, and that's all part of our design. We talked about I think the only other issue there, I think everything else we can comply with.
Yeah.
I think the SOAR calculation had a typo with the number. We went through that with the correct bedrooms. We referenced the covered bikes, and we talked about that enough. I don't think I need to go through that again. But that was referenced in their report as well, so that's a distinction. But otherwise, in terms of the other comments they had, the stormwater requirements, we believe we can meet all of those conditions.
Okay, and then I would segregate the porous pavement issue and the covered bike parking issue if any board member wants to talk about that and see whether they want to impose it in spite of the university's position on it.
Yep. Absolutely.
We should talk about that. Then Dan Dobromilski's memo of July 5, in paragraph 4, and this might be repeated elsewhere, he talks about tree protection, and do you have any issues with that, Christopher?
We do not.
Okay. Then Jack, the memo from the Department of Emergency and Safety Services, has that all been dealt with?
Yeah, that's all been dealt with.
Okay, so there's no condition.
They actually didn't show the plan that I saw today that showed additional, they had a couple of treatments, and it was basically for that loop all the way around the campus was structural turf in some areas, and then grasscrete pavers near the buildings to a width of 20 feet. So they have basically the 10-foot asphalt, and that's going to be supplemented another 10 feet in some areas with grasscrete pavers or stabilized turf.
Okay, and that material, the plans with respect to that have been submitted to the town, and we don't have to impose.
They haven't formally been submitted, but I was emailed a copy today, and I spoke with the fire official, and he was comfortable with it.
Okay, so I'll just make that a condition, just so that to file the.
And I'd say this slide 19 illustrates what Jack is talking about, that the areas where the fire department would like to have the grasscrete for stable pathways is provided here. This is
now that I'm looking at it, that's
we updated the plan that I had initially sent to you to incorporate it into this particular.
They confused me. I had different colors on mine.
Right,
Me too.
Just moving on, Brian Stankis's report, I think all of his recommendations were incorporated into your memo and Derek's memo.
Yes.
Brian's, yeah. Okay.
Just one point with Brian, he's no longer with IH Engineering.
Oh.
So we will be looking for a new traffic engineer. He may be available with the firm he's going to, so he's going to be talking it over with them. But just so you know, he's no longer with IH Engineering.
Okay, and then the memo from Joe Scupian, those are all
Yes,
also
those
been
are all incorporated.
Right. And then the site plan memo, well, basically in the recommendations, they have a construction logistics plan. I'm going to get to that because I have a note on that, and we talked about that. And then the applicant must clearly detail the solar shading proposed in the southwest and east sides. And I know, Ron, you talked about that. Has that been sufficiently detailed at this point, or do we need anything else?
I have two drawings here that I failed to present. So we did provide in the presentation on slides 45 and 46 and 47 details of the overhangs that I talked about. They're pretty technical, but this is a section through a window in College 7 that illustrates the deep set of the window, the overhang over that window, the shading on the southern, and the additional shading that provides on that building. And then on College 8, a window that's deeply recessed into the masonry wall, providing a similar shading profile there.
Would it be fair to say that we can and should consider A1 as part of the submission? You're going to comply with everything in that?
Pardon me?
Is it fair to say that we should consider Exhibit A1 as part of the submission, and you'll comply with everything that's in that? Did you not?
A1, you're talking about our slide?
Yeah, you're right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last memo I have is from the Environmental Commission, and there's a whole series of recommendations. If Christopher, you can go through
Sure.
the executive summary, starting on the second page.
Let me grab that. So in a lot of these, it's really a difference of how the university takes a look at sustainability, where they have a campus-wide approach. So a lot, we share a lot of the same goals, and we're getting there different ways, where they're saying, hey, collect rainwater from the roof. We're saying we're using a source outside, wastewater, to satisfy that, and there's no other reason to collect it. In terms of something like solar, we look at that not as a building by building basis, so it doesn't come in. We don't look at it and say, hey, we're going to put solar on this roof. We're looking at the big picture, at the campus as a whole, and we say, okay, we're going to do a solar program this year. Let's identify the most bang for the buck. What are the best locations where the solar, the array is going to get the most sunlight, it's going to, create the most energy. In this particular project, for example, it's going to be solar ready. So there's some green roofs, we're not going to put any there, but there's some higher roofs, I can't remember if there may be 8 of them or so, where they're designed to support solar panels. It'll have conduits, it'll have spaces where you can have for the transformers, so it'll be ready to go. When the university comes and looks at their next university-wide solar phase, I should say, then it'll be evaluated with other possible buildings and other locations. I could say that their first step was in West Windsor. It was a 4.5 megawatt facility. It's out there now. I think you could see it in one of the early slides we showed if you look at the West Windsor side, and that actually feeds into the campus. That actually produces 5% of the university's electric need of today. We are actually looking at our next package, and our next package it's a solar program. Like I said, we don't look at it as a building program. We look at it as a solar program. We're looking at 5 places in Princeton, 2 locations in West Windsor, and 2 locations, a field array and a building array in Plainsboro. At this point, we do actually have the approvals for the Plainsboro one, so that's already approved. The Princeton one, we expect to have that in very soon, so you're going to see something where we're going to come in and propose at least 5 locations for our next big phase solar. And again, that's going to really push up the percentage. If you take a look at what the university's electric need is today, as I said, the West Windsor facility is producing about 5% of that. If we get approvals for all of our next phase, that's going to kick up, something closer to 20%. So we're really making good steps. We look at it as a holistic approach. This building's designed for it. When it'll come online is an issue of when we're going, the SRECs, when we're going to package it together with our next solar project. The end goal is carbon neutral by 2046. So all of these philosophies, all of these programs are going to come in place, and they're, like I said, done on a university-wide approach.
Okay. I'm just going to jump in and say my motion was quite specifically conditioned on the staff recommendations, not, the attached letters. And so, I was pretty satisfied with the sustainability elements that were described in the presentation. I'm assuming that Zenon, as a representative from PEC, would also have spoken up if he was unhappy about anything that was in the PEC memo that he felt was important and was ignored. So I don't think we need to go through the PEC memo item by item.
Yeah, that was fine.
Yeah, I would second that. I think that they addressed a lot of that, and I think they also sent a memo to the board earlier where they kind of addressed some of the issues, how they're looking at a kind of larger systemic view. So I think that we don't really need to go through that.
Fine, thank you. I just want to go through my notes.
The one other issue that they raised that maybe we haven't addressed is that we have electric facilities for the rooms, but our kitchen is gas, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Even though you can argue that electric may be a little cleaner, the gas is a lot more efficient, so the savings is not as great as everybody would like. Also, in the case of emergencies, where electricity goes out, you're still able to cook with the gas. So in the context of the gas appliances, and it's not just an oven, there's all different types of different apparatus in a kitchen in like a commercial kitchen, so to speak. That is something that's really needed in that position. Where we could have electric for the rooms, we do.
Yeah,
So
thanks for bringing that up. I kind of forgot about it earlier, and I didn't
Yeah, that
want to
was
go
sort
rehash
of,
that. But
everything else we've sort of talked about, like in terms of their other comments and our approach to it, but that was one that was like a
right. But obviously, I would encourage you guys to. I'm sure you're exploring induction stoves and trying to electrify as much of the building as possible, which it seems like you've already been doing. So,
Absolutely.
Okay, David, let me just go through what I jotted down as conditions, and then you decide whether you want to include them in your memo, or, in your motion or not, okay? Yeah. Well, why don't you hear me out on them, and then.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one was increasing the stormwater management transition capacity, that is the pipes and catch basins, to handle a 100-year storm event. I don't think it was in the staff reports, but.
It was in the staff reports.
Wasn't in the staff reports, okay. And then the early start with respect to fencing for the site, trailers, utility hookups, which Christopher indicated. You okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. And then the construction plan was in the staff report. But what about replacing the pedestrian sign on South Drive? I think that was in the staff report, right?
It was.
That's it. And the only two issues are, if the board wants to address them at all, are the porous pavement and the covered parking. Covered bicycle parking.
All right, I think we're good with that. So, Carrie, do you want to do a roll call?
Yes.
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 Yes. Well, thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming in. It was an excellent report, very thorough, and we really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
We
everyone.
appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Beat you to the punch,
Adjourn.
Mr. Cohen. Thank you for your sensitivity
That's why I thought I'd go through and make sure that we get to the end.